Hello, and thank you for joining us today. Our world has been impacted by this pandemic, and our nonprofit community is no exception. Our goal at the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy is to continue to offer relevant and useful content to help our organizations thrive. Kerredyn Collaborative recently reached out to us to provide this critical resource to our community of nonprofits navigating this new normal. So we have added this special webinar to our regular monthly webinar schedule. With that, I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, Fundraising and Advocacy Strategies for Nonprofits, Pandemic Response. My name is Pearl Hoagland, and I am the Senior Program Manager for the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy. Before we get started, a couple notes. This webinar will be conversational with the opportunity to ask questions during the webinar, as well as a Q&A following the presentation. Please submit any questions you have in the chat box using your GoToWebinar control panel. In the days following the webinar, you will receive an email with the slide deck and recording to review again on your own time. At the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy, we enhance fundraisers' skills so they can develop and sustain donor relationships to advance their cause in today's growing giving landscape. Apologies, it looks like our slides just disappeared, so we're going to get them back up on the screen so that you can see them. While we're getting our slides up, if you are on social media, please do give us a shout out using the hashtag SIP webinar and tag us. Now I'm going to introduce our presenter, Katie Adams Farrell. Katie is the co-founder and CFO of Kerredyn Collaborative, which provides a range of strategic and development services for small businesses and nonprofit organizations, including web and digital support and strategy, strategic planning, branding and messaging, and grants and funding. Katie has also been a long-standing instructor for the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy. There she is. Katie, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I am excited to be here with you today. And although that sounds like kind of a weird emotion to have in the moment in this completely uncertain and crazy climate we're in, I think that we have a lot that we can do together to move the sector forward in this moment. And so I'm happy to be here with all of you today. And before we get started, I just want to say to everyone that is taking the time out to be with us today, thank you. If you're sick or caring for somebody that's sick or have a family member or friend that's sick, my heart goes out to you. If you're on the front lines of this crisis, if you have family members that are doctors or nurses or in some other capacity front lines, thank you. You know, and to all those moms and dads, but you know, a lot of the burden falls on the women. For those of you who have found yourself working from home and being the educator to your children and the chef and the housekeeper, and the trip to the grocery store is now this huge thing, you know, I'm with you, and I feel you, and we're gonna get through this together. And just thank you so much for being here with us today. So let's get started. And just, I wanna make sure that everybody can see the screen. So if you can put a little note in the chat, if you can see the screen, just wanna make sure our slides are good. Pearl?
They're coming up right now, yes. So we now are on your slide.
Great. Okay, so let's do our first poll. And our first poll is, I just want to kind of get an understanding of who we have on with us today so that we can be as targeted as possible. The nonprofit sector is a huge sector, obviously. So what industry do you work in? Arts and culture, education, health and human services, environment, or something else? Go ahead and tell us in the chat.
A poll has just launched on your screen, and you'll get about 10 seconds to fill it in. All right, let's take a look at the results. Katie, it looks like the largest majority, 46% in health and human services, 30% education, 6% arts and culture, 5% environment, and 14% other.
Yeah, that makes quite a bit of sense actually with the way that nonprofits are across the nation. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Let's go on to our next one. Oh no, what's happening?
We're going through the slides. Christine is going through them.
Oh, okay. Has your nonprofit gone through layoffs, or are you considering layoffs? Yes, no, we're looking at options, other. Tell us in the chat.
Again, we'll give you about 10 seconds to put in your response. Okay, let's take a look at the results. Katie, we have 53% no, 28% we are looking at options, 13% yes, and 6% other. And some of the others are we're not sure, volunteer only organization. Those are some of the answers.
Okay, got it. Makes perfect sense. Great. So unfortunately, my slides are off. So are you familiar with federal relief programs for nonprofits? Yes, no, we just started looking into this option, or other. Tell us in the chat.
Again, we're going to give you about 10 seconds. All right, let's see what we have. We have 43% yes, 34% we just started looking into this option, 20% no, and 4% other.
Okay. All right, so I just want to stop and make sure again that everybody can see the slides. COVID-19 relief and stimulus should be the slide. So Pearl, can you just help me make sure that we are, sorry about this. I'm new to this technology, so please, give me some grace on this and we'll get through it together.
Yes, no, we can't see them yet, but it looks like if you just reshare your screen, we should be good to go. Sorry, folks, sometimes in nonprofit we pivot, and looks like we are good to go now.
Yes, we've figured it out together. All right, so there are a number, we're gonna just get started really fast now. So there are a number of relief and stimulus packages that are coming through the pipeline from the federal and state governments. You have probably heard of all of them. So the very first one, if we go back to to January 3rd, was the Coronavirus Preparedness and Response Supplemental Act of 2020, and that basically expanded provisions for employees. Then there's the Families First Coronavirus Response Act that was signed on March 18th. And then this last one, which was signed last Friday, March 27th, is the CARES Act. And so there are a number of provisions that we're going to go through in the CARES Act, but some of which you've probably heard of, like the PPP, and there are some grant funds from the NEA, NEH, IMLS, and then of course the $1,200 direct payment to families. So we will go through those, not in great detail, but an overview, so you know what may or may not be a fit for your nonprofit. All of the loan options are open to nonprofits. And please know that additional legislation is expected. This is not going to be a short-term thing at all in any way, shape, or form. So additional legislation is expected. And also, of course, your state and local governments are also mobilizing, as well as private funders. So what are we going to talk about today? We are going to understand what financing opportunities are available to you immediately, what resources are available to your employees. We're going to learn about some of the legislative efforts, explore communication strategies, and we'll begin to form a plan for recouping lost revenue. Most importantly, I encourage everyone to stay connected, join all the Facebook groups. Please connect with SIP every possibly way you can, because it just really helps to be able to bounce ideas and share thoughts. Bonk, all right. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but nonprofits are an economic engine. The nonprofit sector accounts for 5.4% of the country's GDP, and it employs more than 10% of the nation's workforce. So that means that 1 out of every 10 people that lives in this nation is employed by a nonprofit organization. From service interruptions to layoffs, COVID-19 is taking an enormous toll on the sector. So what are we going to do about it? There are opportunities for loans, grants. Of course, there's individual donors. There are tax credits. But what I hope that all of you will understand today is that there's no silver bullet. There may indeed be a silver lining, and that's for you and your organization to discover together. But a sound financial strategy will use a combination of these funding and financing pathways in order to make sure that your future is more secure. So first things first, we cannot fundraise or get a loan if we don't know how much we need, right? So we have to start from a place of understanding our financial position. So I've put together, and of course, you know, many of you may have CFOs, but if you don't, it's an important conversation to have with yourself and your staff about what actually is this gap. You know, we're all really worried about money, but what does that actually mean? What income have you lost or will you lose in the next several months? And so in this little example, I just put up April, May, and June. We know that, you know, June 1st, the economy is not going to magically reopen and we're all going to have our theater productions and, you know, the kids are all back in school and all of that kind of stuff, right? That is not the world that we're living in. This is going to be a gradual and long-term thing. So it may be worth projecting how much earned income you would lose in 3 months, 6 months, or a year. That's for you to decide what's the best fit for your organization, but I encourage you to look at a few different timelines. What are your receivables? Don't include pledges that you might need to write off, but do understand when they will come in, right? We're trying to understand cash flow. What are your projected expenses in the next, whatever you do, 3 months, 6 months, year? What reserve funds are available, if any? What's the time frame in accessing these reserve funds? Sometimes an organization does have an endowment and they need a board to make a decision about how they can access that endowment, and that takes time. And what non-essential expenses can be eliminated. And this is an extremely difficult conversation that I'm sure many of you already have and will continue to have. But what can you cut? And so this is a model, this is a matrix map, and it's a model that is used by a number of nonprofit organizations and consultants in helping nonprofits understand what activities they should invest in and what activities they may want to let kind of go, whether that be for the time being or permanently. And so I was on a webinar a few weeks ago, and this is just quick anecdotally. The woman who was speaking said, this is the time for mission expansion. And I have to say that although I understand absolutely that school of thought, that is not mine. I think that this is the time for focus and for impact. And so what I see in this matrix map is the ability for us to look at our programs and expenses and really, really, really focus on those that are high mission impact and low profitability versus high profitability. You'll have to have a mix of those two things depending on your revenue model, your funding model. That's not, you know, that's a very individualized thing, but I encourage you, you know, what is the actual mission of the organization? Let's continue the activities that are high mission impact and let some of the activities that are low mission impact go right now and maybe forever. You know, we have gotten very stretched, and we find ourselves doing activities that maybe aren't in the wheelhouse of our mission in order to get funding. And we have to let some of that go and just be really, really confident in our mission impact and our ability to fund it. Also, what are the things that we can do in the future versus today, right? So if there are projects that you are in the middle of that you can safely push a few months out or a year out, maybe that's something you'll want to consider doing. Just what actually needs to be done today versus what can be done in a year from now. So after you do those few things and you find out what that funding gap is, There are a number of loans, grant programs, those types of things that we can look into. So we're going to go through some of these loan options. And so you have probably heard of the PPP, right? The Paycheck Protection Program. It's an SBA funded program. It's SBA Section 7A as well as 8A. And these are existing programs, but there's a number of ways that the SBA, the federal government, is making those accessible to nonprofit organizations. So just in case you're not familiar, the SBA is the Small Business Administration. The Small Business Administration is run and funded by the federal government, and then it also funds what's called SBDCs, Small Business Development Centers. There are tons of SBDCs all across the nation. I assure you that there's one in your community or very near your community. I encourage you to get in contact with an SBDC advisor because they can help you make decisions about which programs to move forward with and which ones you're not eligible for. So for the Paycheck Protection Program, it's loans for nonprofits and small businesses with less than 500 employees to pay staff and cover some operating expenses for 2 months. It's pretty targeted, so it is absolutely for payroll, and then those operating expenses include things like rent and utilities and just really basic needs in terms of operating expenses. There is a forgiveness provision in this program, and it's based on maintaining employment. So, and the principal is eligible forgiveness for forgiveness depending on how many employees you keep on the payroll. And you would apply for this loan through your local lender. There are, like Bank of America, for example, is an SBA lender. There are a lot of local credit unions, especially. Again, if you get in contact with an advisor from the SBDC, they can put you in touch with a local lender. My computer loves to make noises at me. All right, the Economic and Injury Disaster Loan, EIDL. Again, this was an existing loan program that has been tailored to our current circumstances. The interest rate is starts at 2.75, I think up to 3.25, and it is limited to certain nonprofits, which are nursing homes, food kitchens, educational facilities, senior citizen centers, daycare centers, playhouses, shelters, and others. This one you can apply for directly on the SBA website. You cannot go for both. If you already have an EIDL loan, you cannot go for the PPP loan. So you can't go for both. Make a decision about which one is the best fit for you. But that one has a very easy application process on the SBA website. There is an additional loan program coming from the Treasury Department. It's aimed at larger organizations that have between 500 and 10,000 employees. The details, the Treasury Department has not released these details yet, although we know it's coming. And again, if you would get in touch with your SBDC or your local lender that you already have a relationship with, they would be able to advise you on how to move forward with that as well. So some other provisions for nonprofits. You've probably heard that tax day is delayed to July 15th. You have to make a decision about whether that's something you do or don't want to do. Charitable giving incentive was extended to non-itemizing taxpayers for up to $300. So this is totally confusing, right? What is itemizing versus non-itemizing? With the Tax Reform Act 2017, the number of people who itemize on their taxes was shrunk considerably. So this provision just extends the charitable giving incentive to everyone. So even if you don't itemize on your taxes, you're eligible to claim a write-off of up to $300. So I think we know as fundraisers that the majority of people do not make decisions about who they give to or when or where they give based on a tax incentive. But it does help as kind of a bonus little sales point in there. Employee retention payroll tax credit. So again, this is something you'd want to work with your tax attorney, but it's a refundable payroll tax credit of up to $5,000 for each employee that you retain. Provisions for employees. So if you are considering or have been in the unfortunate position of laying off your employees, I'm sure that you are committed to getting them the best resources that they possibly can. So of course, in the CARES Act, there's the direct payments, $1,200 or less and $500 per child. The people who make over $99,000 a year are not eligible for any funding. People who make $75,000 to $99,000 are eligible for kind of a staged amount of funding. And as you've probably read in the news, those payments may take a while to get to you. There are a number of expanded unemployment provisions. So the weekly payment has been expanded by the federal government by $600 per week on top of state benefits. That's a huge boon to your employees. It also includes coverage for workers who are furloughed, gig workers, and freelancers. So in the nonprofit sector, I have a lot of clients that are in arts and culture. They are incredibly impacted by this crisis. They also retain a number of their artists through, gigs and freelancing. And so this is a huge thing for those employees. Also, paid sick leave. Employers with fewer than 500 employees must provide their employees with 2 weeks of paid sick leave. Also, the employers can claim a refundable tax credit for that because it absolutely does put a burden on the organization. An emergency family leave, up to 12 weeks of job protected leave. After the first 2 weeks of paid sick leave, employees will be paid 2/3 of their regular pay, up to $200 per day. And this excludes businesses with fewer than 50 employees. All right, so we got through some of that technical stuff. There's lots of resources. I really encourage you to reach out to your SBDC because they're going to be able to help you really understand what the right fit for you is. So now let's move in to what we're here for, fundraising. Everybody I know is saying, Katie, where are the grants at? And I can tell you that there are grants out there. I don't know that they're a fit for your organization. The vast majority of the grants are focused on frontline crisis responders. And so there are a lot of health and human services and education nonprofits on this call today. And so you may be eligible for a lot of those grants. So first things first, yes, the CARES Act, there was $75 million dedicated to the NEA and the NEH by the CARES Act. 40% of that will be dispersed by local state arts agencies. The other 60% will be in the form of direct funding. The NEA has not yet released directions on how to apply for that funding, but they will very soon. They've done it before and they have gotten the money out within 20 weeks, and that's their goal again. So if you go, for example, to NEA.gov, you can read the chairman's statement and that will give you more information. The Chronicle of Philanthropy has made its coronavirus stuff free, content free. So there are 2 articles called Coronavirus Grants Roundup, and it has an extensive list of grant opportunities that are available as emergency relief. So I encourage every single one of you to go check those out and to, apply for the opportunities that fit your organization. Again, please remember that we are all going for the same money, and so go for the opportunities that are a really good fit. A tip that I have for you right now, we have a little bit more time on our hands, at least some of us do. So subscribe to the newsletters of funders, NEA, NEH, Chronicle of Philanthropy, all of these different newsletters. There's a ton of them. Subscribe to these newsletters so that you can get the news when new funding is released. You'll be the first to know. And so especially do that for the people that you have relationships with already, the funders you have relationships with already. For example, if you get funding from a family foundation, please make sure that you subscribe to their mail list if that's accessible, because when they mobilize their boards to make emergency grants known, you'll be the first to know. Advocacy, information, and action. So first things first, open those lines of communication with your representatives. Do not be worried about whether you are a 501c3 and lobbying will negatively affect your status. We're not lobbying, we are having an open relationship with our representatives, and it's absolutely critical. One, because they need to know how this crisis is affecting the sector. They absolutely need to know. And two, because funding from the federal government largely goes to the states and then is dispersed. And so you need to know these people so that you'll have access to this funding. As you build these relationships with your representatives, be kind. They are getting so much flack right now. Be kind, but be firm. Participate in local government efforts. If you can join a task force or a committee or a community table, being really involved, one, helps us feel like we're doing something, and two, it shows that you're willing to not just talk, but really walk the walk too. And follow the advocacy efforts of organizations like the Council of Nonprofits. The Council of Nonprofits, it's kind of the largest advocacy organization. It's a membership-based organization, so you probably have a local chapter as well as the national chapter. They continue to advocate for things like the funding that was in the CARES Act. So follow their efforts. They give us opportunities to participate, like signing on to a letter, or they'll even give kind of a template for a letter that you can send to your local representative to encourage support of a certain legislative action. So do that, follow those things, and they give you a lot of ways to help get involved. And lastly, please speak out against acts of discrimination. Look up anti-stigma resources. Get really familiar with that language, because as resources get more scarce, there will be more bad stuff that we have to stand up against. And we're the nonprofit sector. The nonprofit sector was invented, like literally a nonprofit organizations were invented in order to solve problems, in order to fill in where the federal government can't. And it's our obligation and responsibility to stand up for those who are more vulnerable. Okay, so if your organization decides that you absolutely cannot take out a loan, and it's necessary to fundraise, what do? I would encourage you, unless you are on the front lines of this crisis, if you are on the front lines of this crisis, this does not apply to you. If you are not on the front lines of this crisis, please think twice about mass fundraising appeals. People are so overwhelmed, and the feeling of anxiety and uncertainty about our own personal space makes it really, really hard to be open to mass fundraising appeal. That doesn't mean that no one should fundraise. Stay the course. But just think about like sending out that email. I want to give you an example. I want to give you a bad example, which is probably not normally what I would do, but I'm going to do it anyway. So I read an email from an organization that I really love the other day, and they are a great organization, but they wanted people to create art and then to tag that organization when they created art in quarantine, to tag that organization with the name, and then included just and give us money. And so it was like, we are not only kind of like, taking credit for your creativity in quarantine, we're also going to ask you for money at the same time. So I understand the sentiment, which was that we're all in this together and we're creatives, and let's use this time to connect and create and support the things we love. But that wasn't the message. So please think very carefully about the message. And stay the course with sensitivity. Of course, your fundraising plan has gone in the trash can. Of course it has, but there are probably a lot of elements that you thought about in the beginning of the year or in the end of last year to create your fundraising plan for this year that you need to keep moving forward with. Most of your funders have not shut down their grant deadlines. Most of them have not. Some of them maybe have, which we'll get to that another time. But there are still grants that need to be made. There's still a dedicated board. You still have individual donors. So stay the course, but be sensitive. Take this time, to do some extra personalized stewardship. Like I said, everybody is reeling from this. And this is an interesting crisis, because absolutely, is it affecting people in an equitable way across the board? No, absolutely not. The people with fewer resources, with less money, with less access to healthcare, they are going to be hit by this much harder than somebody with privilege. And I say that from a place of privilege, and I understand that. And so it's, our responsibility to make sure that those of us who are more vulnerable have better access. But also, it is universal that everybody is feeling scared, that everybody is feeling uncertain. And so remember that in the personalized stewardship, even the donors that we're working with that have gobs of money, they're still scared. So tell uplifting stories, and there are a lot of those floating around, and there are a lot of those in your organization. And so spend some time getting back into like, what do we do? What's our impact? What are our really good stories? And what are some of these stories that we can share with our donors, our patrons, to help them understand why we're so important, but also that to just feel better about the world. And then be proactive in your outreach to grantors. So you probably have a lot of contracts, a lot of grant contracts that may or may not be in trouble. I have only seen grantors be supportive. I have not seen any grantors say, well, you can't do it, so give the money back. I have not seen that. They do not want that. And yes, I'm comfortable using that blanket statement, but be proactive in that outreach. So many of them probably have already sent you an email saying, use this as general operating, or get in contact with us if you think it's not going to work out because of the crisis. But those that are smaller, maybe they haven't mobilized quite as quickly because they don't have a big staff. And so be proactive in that outreach. Let them know what aspects of the program you're able to do, what aspects of the program you're going to have to change, what aspects of the program just can't happen, and do it in a kind and grateful kind of way. And last but not least, target. This is not the time for blanketing people, right? We have to be really, really specific and targeted and customized and personalized in our interaction with our donors. And this goes back to really understanding what's high mission impact and finding those stories that demonstrate high mission impact, and finding those donors that are extraordinarily committed to your cause, and focus on those. We should know all of this stuff. So a lot of people who are participating in this webinar maybe have already heard of the Sanford Institute of Philanthropy, and hopefully you've already participated in a couple of webinars, and so you know what the cause selling cycle is. But I am going to super quickly kind of tell you about the cause selling cycle, just because I think that gets us to the place where we feel really comfortable targeting. So in phase 1, you're prospecting pre-approach. In phase 2, the approach, need discovery, presentation, and handling objections is all about building a relationship with your donor, getting to know what your donor wants their impact to be and how that relates to your organization. So if you've already done this work with your donors, this should be right now, this emergency fundraising should be a pretty easy conversation. If you haven't, now is the time. If your donors are open to a phone call in which you do a need discovery is literally a conversation where you ask them questions, getting to know who they are, what they care about, who they like to give to, how they like to give, all of those kinds of things. You can wrap it into your stewardship and cultivation efforts, but I highly encourage those types of conversations, because this crisis is changing very quickly, and our fundraising goals may be different today than they were yesterday. The things that we need to fundraise for may be different today than they were yesterday. And so understanding in a deep way how your donors feel about your organization and their impact through your organization, again, their impact through your organization, is critical. And then, of course, there's a lot of time in the cause selling cycle spent on stewardship, and so dig in there. Who to target? This is a very customized thing. You and your organization will figure this out on your own. Again, I'm so sorry that I don't have a silver bullet for you. I really, really wish that I did, but that's not the nature of fundraising generally. So who to target? Here are some questions to consider. Are there board members or loyal individual donors that you have an exceptional relationship that you think would be responsive to an urgent ask? Maybe a strategy is that you have a few board members who are asking you, like, what do we do? How do we get us through this? How do we get this organization through this? And it's really important that you give them something to do. And maybe that's asking their friends on Facebook, maybe it's asking a couple of their friends just in a one-on-one basis to be able to give. I don't know. You'll have to decide that with your board members, but who would be responsive to an urgent ask? And a little note about urgent ask. What do I mean by urgent ask? This is the time to be transparent, but not desperate, to be transparent with your donors, to help them understand how this crisis is affecting you. For example, a number of my clients are performing arts organizations. The New York Times put out an article a couple of weeks ago, last week, maybe it was earlier this week. Times doesn't exist anymore. Put out an article that said that performing arts organizations is number 2 on the list of industries that will be most affected by this crisis. And that's because, for example, a theater with 350 seats, we have absolutely no idea when this theater company will be allowed to open its doors and welcome its patrons back, right? It could be a year, to be perfectly honest. And so it's important to kind of communicate to our donors why we need it now, without being like, oh my God, we're gonna have to close our doors. No desperation, no freaking out, but being actually transparent about where we are. A lot of times we kind of want to gloss over things and make them look really shiny and pretty, and that's not the time for this. Are there funding opportunities associated with taking programs and events online? So are there corporate sponsors? If you transition to an event, to a digital event, could you sell sponsorship to a local business or a corporate sponsor? A local business that's small, probably not, but you never know. Again, stay the course with sensitivity. What about family foundations? Do you have relationships with family foundations? They often have shorter or informal grant cycles, and so they would be able to make a grant to your organization on a quicker basis than some of the larger ones. Of course, are foundations worried about the market right now? Yes, but I feel that very few of them will stop their grant making entirely because they're scared of the market. They know this family foundations, any foundation, was put together for the purpose of giving away money where it's needed, when it's needed, and I think you can lean into that. And lastly, going back to this again, develop relationships with your local government representatives. The relief comes through them. Okay, I wanted to leave a bunch of time for questions, and so Pearl is going to help us with that. But before we move into the questions, I just want to remind everyone to take care of each other, to stay connected, join a Facebook group. Go ahead, waste an hour a day on Facebook. Now's the time. Do webinars, invest in your own learning, participate in podcasts, and think and plan for the future. We have been talking a lot about how this mindset of resource scarcity has affected our ability to fundraise, because funders want very specific impact, and nonprofits are willing to expand their mission in order to get that money because we never have enough of it. And so it's this kind of vicious cycle of oh, we don't have enough money, but oh, we can only get money for this, but oh, now we don't have enough money to do this, and blah, 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 right? And it gets totally overwhelming. And so this is an opportunity for better. It really, really is. When we focus in on what's our mission, and we take the time to identify the funders that believe so fiercely in our mission, we can build a new sector. We can build a new sector where we're not chasing our tails, where we are opening our doors and our hearts, and we're doing important work, and there's an abundance of resources. I truly, truly believe that, and it will take extremely hard work. but I'm in for it. I'm ready for it, and I hope you are too. And so thank you so much for being on this call with me today. And Pearl, I'm going to turn it back over to you so we can open it up for questions.
Yes, we have them coming in quickly. So first, apologies we won't be able to get to all of them, but I'm just going to jump in. The first one is from an organization on the front lines. They operate homeless shelters, food distribution, and need to continue to raise funds. Their question is, do you think it is negative to do a mass fundraising appeal? I've heard mixed messages about this recently. People are overwhelmed and we don't want to negatively impact them, but we have programs that we're offering right now that we need to continue offering.
Yeah, I think and so I have heard mixed messages on this as well. And here's what I feel about it. I feel that especially, and I have a couple of clients that are shelters as well. And what I feel about it is that your work is critical. It is absolutely 100% critical. And I think the people on your mail list already know that. And so, yes, are they overwhelmed? Yes. So tell them positive stories. Don't tell them negative stories about what's going to happen to the population of people experiencing homelessness if they don't get your services. Don't take that route. Positive, positive, positive. And I think that will generate more loyalty. And yes, I do think that organizations on the front lines, especially those protecting the most vulnerable citizens among us, and residents, sorry, not just citizens, the most vulnerable people among us, should absolutely continue to move forward with those efforts. I think they just need to be really focused on story and positivity.
Thank you. Okay, very quickly, we've received a number of very specific questions about the specifics of the loans, also paid sick leave, including terminology, qualifications, provisions. Can you remind us where we can go to find that information?
Absolutely. So a couple of different places, starting with the loans. If you go to the SBA website, literally sba.gov, there is a COVID-19 resources page. I did not check this morning whether or not they had put the PPP program up there, but it opens today. So the SBA website is the right place to go to look at the loans. In terms of employee provisions, so for example, in the state of California, which is where I live, we have the CAEDD. And so those are state-run programs, although they're federally funded, they are executed by the state. And so you will want to go to your state's economic development department to understand what those are. And so things like paid sick leave, things like paid family leave and disability and filing those claims are initiated by the employer. In California, we have something called a work share program. And so, reach out to your local EDD, also your local SBDC, Small Business Development Center advisors will have information on this stuff for you too. But there's a ton of information on the EDD website. Just look it up in your state.
Great. Okay, so talking about mass appeals, someone wrote, I understand shying away from mass appeals. What do you suggest with direct mail during this time? Subject lines? What about mass check-ins with donors when you can't individually contact all? And then with a lens of those organizations, again, who are providing frontline services.
Okay, I'm going to try to go through these one by one, but as quickly as I can. So I would recommend on the front lines, if you need to do a mass fundraising appeal, then do it, like I said before, and be really sensitive about the language that you use. In terms of mass check-ins with donors, I would be a little bit careful because it feels like a mass check-in. Like you don't really care about me, but it's the time, so you're just sending something. So I don't know exactly what you mean by mass check-ins with donors, but I would be a little bit careful about that. And this is the time where you can go through your donor database and segment and ask board members for help in reaching out to certain people or whatever you need to do. It sounds to me like you're coming from a larger organization. And so I'm sure that you have annual giving strategies that you can employ in a super targeted way, but I would shy away from mass check-ins with donors because it will feel like that. Pearl, there was a third one that I'm missing.
Let's see, what was the other one? It was about, no, that was, oh, subject lines.
Oh, subject lines. Okay, so do not do a scary subject line. Please don't do a scary subject line. We are already getting emails with so many scary subject lines. Do something that catches attention and that feels uplifting, honestly. Like, it's got to be uplifting if you want somebody to click. The headlines are bad subject lines over and over and over and over again. So if your subject is reading like a headline that you see pop up on your notifications for Apple News, like, run away from that. Run away from that. Try uplifting.
Great, thank you. Okay, on to the next question. Are there any good groups, in quotes, where you can network with other nonprofit members to have the opportunity to share questions, ideas, and then also what Facebook groups would you recommend joining?
So I would have to actually go on to Facebook in order to give you kind of some specifics. But I think if you type in, you can find a number of groups. Obviously, the groups that have the more people in them have more stuff going on. For sure, there are local Facebook groups. I mean, there are Facebook groups for local chapters of Council of Nonprofits. So that's a resource I would start with. Also, because they get support from the national organization, so there's somebody kind of putting the bigger information in there as well. So I would definitely start with local chapter, Council of Nonprofits. I absolutely recommend getting in touch or subscribing to a newsletter or becoming part of their Facebook group for Council of Nonprofits. They're doing really good work, really taking care of all of us. In terms of other Facebook groups that you may want to subscribe to, what does your organization do? Use keywords and find the groups. It's better to be in a group with people who are doing that same kind of work, because what works for a theater company and a shelter for people experiencing homelessness are not always the same thing. And so it helps to be in a group of people that know exactly what you're going through. So I'm sorry I don't have more specifics other than Council of Nonprofits.
Great, thank you. We have so many questions. I'd love to get through them all. I think we have time for 2 more questions. So one question is, family foundations have decreased their giving and a lot have gone to not accepting unsolicited proposals.
Ooh.
Will you please address how to approach them given these factors?
Well, if they're saying we are not accepting proposals right now, then you have to respect that. And probably they're saying that because there's stuff going on with their board and they can't get them together in order to make these decisions. Maybe somebody's sick. Maybe they have family members that are sick. Maybe they're just scared about the economy, in which case there's not that much you can do to help them feel better about the economy, right? It's kind of a scary time. My husband is in finance and he says, listen, this is a scary time right now, but it might not be in 6 months from now. It might not be in a year from now. There are still some really strong things that are happening in our economy. So we don't need to should an organization be prepared for the worst? Absolutely. Should we fear the worst? It's not the time. We got to keep moving forward. So I wish that foundations were not doing that, but they are. And so we have to respect the ones that do that. For the ones that haven't said anything, now is the time to check in. And for those, there are a lot of the larger foundations. Like, for example, in Southern California, we've got the Annenberg Foundation, Amundsen Foundation, Weingart Foundation. We've got some really big ones, and they do have formal grant cycles, and Parsons Foundation. A lot of those have opened up to general operating support and now are accepting applications for general operating support. So focus on the foundations who have opened their doors a little bit more. Go ahead and reach out to new prospects. Develop a relationship as much as possible. And for those that have just shut their doors, understand that it's not worth it right now. And hopefully we'd be able to get through whatever they're going through and reopen their doors in a couple of months from now. And that's a bummer. It's a super bummer.
So this next one, we're going to try to do 2 more, actually. I want to get all these in. I am on the board of a volunteer-run arts organization, no staff. 75% of the board is still working right now, and we're feeling really overwhelmed. Any recommendations on what we should focus on first?
Yeah, absolutely. So I also am the president of a nonprofit organization. It's not in the arts. And same situation. We are all volunteers, also working and educating our children and, going to the grocery store, which is a whole thing. And what we have done is we called an emergency board meeting, and we were all willing to get on a Zoom call for an hour. And we figured out what is most important to us during this crisis. And what we figured out is most important to us during this crisis is making sure that our members have, to support women entrepreneurs, to make sure that our members have access to these programs that are supporting small business. And so that if they need a loan or a grant, they know where to go. We can be a resource for that. We used to do tons of programs. We're not doing any of those programs for the rest of the year. We're focused on making sure that our members have a place to come share what they need to share, and that they're getting the resources they need. So what we did is we decided that these are the two things we do, and that's it. And we will reassess in June. So we really, really focused on that mission impact. Like, what do we need to do above the line mission impact? Also, we did a poll for who is available to do what. And there were a couple of people who were like, I'm out. And there were a couple of people who said, I can post to Facebook once a week, And so we just kind of reassigned duties based on that. I hope that helps. That's my experience.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Should our messaging to donors include the financial gaps we will have based on the economy?
It depends on your donor. It should not be a scary thing. I believe in being transparent. I believe in setting revenue goals, but it depends on the donor. So if framed in a realistic way, that where is also wrapped into positive stories about like, this is the gap we need in order for you to have this impact, then yes, please use a revenue goal. But if it's just like, we can't do any performances, we have a $400,000 gap we're facing, and we're going to have to shut our doors, that is not a take right now that I would recommend, because it's just so overwhelming for people.
Since that was a very quick answer, I'm just going to ask this one last question.
Yeah, let's do as many as we can.
I know, I want to just get as many as we can in. So if we have time after this, I'll try to throw one in more. I'm just going to go as long as we can. How many e-blasts are too many? I don't want to lose our subscribers, but want to keep us on their map and update supporters about our programs that continue to change as the pandemic changes.
I mean, I think that really depends on how many emails you were doing before and who the people are. So if you were doing daily emails before, I would cut it down a little bit, just because there's a lot of information coming in. If you were doing monthly emails before, maybe take that up a little bit more if you're willing to tell positive stories. But certainly do not, if you were not really sending consistent emails, don't start today. Unless you want to start consistent emails like once a month or once every other week or something like that, that would be fine. But if you did 2 emails already this year and that's it, and now you start emailing every single week, that feels opportunistic, even though it's not. But it can be. It can feel that way. So I would make that decision based on your history of emails, and maybe send out a short survey that says, how often do you want to hear from us, to a couple of people that you know are open to your cause, and see what they say, get some feedback. It's a great relationship building tool to use also, to ask people's opinion. People love giving you advice. So use it as a stewardship or cultivation tool.
Thank you, Katie. All right, I think we have to move on. I apologize to anyone whose questions we couldn't get to, but we're actually, in the next few slides, you're going to see Katie's information, so you can contact her also with any questions. Thank you everyone for participating in the Q&A and for this great conversation. Just a reminder that you will be receiving the recording and the slides in a follow-up email. If you'd like to contact Katie, you can now see her contact information on the screen. This will be included in the slides that you receive. Katie, one thing, if there's one thing you want folks to walk away with today, what would it be?
Can I do two things, Pearl?
Yeah.
Okay, the first thing is stay the course, but with sensitivity. Don't say we can't fundraise at all. Stay the course, but with sensitivity. And the second thing is we are in this together, and the crisis is not equitably distributed across everybody, but we are in this together. And so let's remember that, and let's come together and let's build a better nonprofit sector.
I love it. Thank you so much. And Katie, to you and your team at Kerredyn Collaborative, thank you so much for creating this resource and for bringing it to our nonprofit leaders for this webinar. For everyone who's still on, check out the link on the screen right now. This is a page that Kerredyn will continue to update regularly to help you navigate this pandemic as it changes and as it evolves. So thank you again to Katie and your team at Kerredyn Collaborative.
Thanks.
As we move forward, we invite you to learn about our textbook, Cause Selling, A Guide to Relationship-Driven Fundraising. It is available on Amazon and Kindle, and if you go to causeselling.org, you can get a free first chapter today. Don't miss our next webinar on April 15th, Harassment and Misconduct. It's not just a for-profit issue with Adriana Lozon-Ceballos. You'll receive a link to register in our follow-up email. And finally, thank you to everyone for your time and participation. To help us continue to improve our webinar series, please take a few minutes to complete our survey. We hope you are all safe and healthy and have a great weekend. Thank you for all that you do to better the communities in which we live, work, and play. As Katie said, we're in this together, and we'll see you on April 15th. Thank you.